So in the previous video on geomagnetism, we saw a short clip on the weighing of magnets. The idea was that powerful magnets should be able to interact with the vertical component of the Earth's magnetic field in a manner similar to that of the dip needle, but reflecting slight differences in weight on each face of the magnet. We can see here in a continuous shot that the 3-inch diameter neodymium ring magnet has a weight of 194.56 grams when it is placed on its side, but laying it down with its side or south pole facing upwards, we can see that it weighs slightly less at 194.52 grams than when it was weighed on its side. Reversing it so that its north pole faces upward, we can see that its apparent weight has slightly increased to 194.67 grams. The same happens with the 1-inch diameter disc magnet. And here we can see a slight torque manifest in the horizontal plane as the disc magnet orients itself with the geomagnetic field. So both magnets seem to lose apparent weight when their respective south poles are facing upwards to the sky. I must note here that the weight changes shown in the experiment are slightly less than those shown in the video Geomagnetic Levitation, Project Magnet, and the Magnocraft. Despite being a DC field, the geomagnetic field is very dynamic and hence fluctuates. This has been mentioned by others who have studied Earth energies. Also in Shirley Andrews' book on Atlantis, she mentions the powerful energy that are in ley lines, some of which are generated by geomagnetism, and that was harnessed for energy and levitation in distant antiquity. However, during certain celestial events, such as eclipses, this energy could dissipate drastically. So if geomagnetism can indeed be tapped in this manner, then we would need to conduct a massive study of the field over some period of time so that we could develop a means of predicting these fluctuations. But even with these differences in experimental results, we can see definitive weight changes. This principle is confirmed in the following document entitled Cosmology Note by Greg Hadowinek that is dated back to 1992. I found the article on the site rexresearch.com quite a while ago during my researches into alternative science. Thankfully, I printed a copy as this particular article is no longer available on the site. It illustrates a few very interesting experiments into what some might call the unified field theory, seemingly demonstrating theoretically and empirically that magnetism, electricity, and even gravity can interact directly with each other with additive and subtractive effects. Effects which can be understood in terms of what are called scalar fields or even directed vector potentials. A scalar potential is a quantity with magnitude but with no direction. Examples include temperature, volume, and density. Force and velocity, on the other hand, are vectors which are quantities which involve both magnitude and direction. The article itself confirms this by saying that the scalar fields can add or subtract algebraically, even in the directed vector form, such as Earth's gravity, provided the components lie in the same direction. So though gravity, electricity, and magnetism are vectors, if they are acting in the same direction, then we can refer to them temporarily as scalar quantities, as only magnitudes can be added to or subtracted from each other. It goes on to give the example of the Earth's static electric field and gravitational field being able to interact as they are both directed towards the center of the Earth. The fields can interact with locally created fields and lead to new processes, energy sources, as well as levitation or anti-gravity mechanisms. The magnet weighing experiment is one such experiment which illustrates these types of interactions, with the gravitational fields directed downwards interacting with the vertical component of the geomagnetic field. In the figure here, when the magnet's magnetic field is in the opposite direction of the gravitational field, there is a repulsion and an increase in the magnet's apparent weight. But when the magnet is flipped over to the other face, the magnetic field is oriented in the same direction as the gravitational field, and there is an attraction, resulting in a loss of apparent weight or levity. A similar experiment is shown in Figure 13, in which an electrically charged plastic disc is rotated. The rotating charge generates a magnetic field, which will have a given polarity according to the direction of rotation. When rotating in one direction, the direction of the generated magnetic field is in opposition to the gravitational field, and there is a repulsion and an accompanying increase in the disk's apparent weight. When the rotation direction is reversed, the resulting magnetic field is oriented in the same direction as the gravitational field, and there is an attraction, again resulting in a loss of apparent weight or levity. With this particular example, we get additional insight into the rotational levity systems of Victor Schauberger, John Searle, and Otis T. Carr, systems which also generated powerful magnetic fields by the rapid rotations of charged particles, charged plates, and magnets. These scalars, or directed vector quantities, are certainly interesting models in attempting to understand the unified field theory. There are some who would say that these models show that the fields are one and the same, but others would say that they are merely additive or subtractive effects, as gravity itself is not actually modified. However, apparent weight is indeed modified. In fact, apparent weight, as we can see with the magnet weighing experiment, is due not solely to the effect of the gravitational field on the mass, but depending on how an object is energized, its total weight can be dependent on other fields. For instance, depending on electrified surfaces or particles' polarity, it would experience greater or lesser weight within the Earth's electrostatic field, while a magnetized object, as we have seen, will experience a greater or lesser apparent weight within the geomagnetic field, as long as those fields are directed in the same vertical direction as gravity. And as far as the gravito-inertial field, depending on where an object, whether charged or not, is located on the Earth's surface, it too will have a different apparent weight, as objects at or near the equator will weigh slightly less than anywhere else on Earth, especially at the poles, due to the Earth's centrifugal force, which slightly counteracts gravity. And according to Otis T. Carr, if the masses themselves are rotating at sufficient speed, they will also experience additional gravito-inertial interactions with the Earth's gravitational field. All of these forces ultimately play a role in the apparent weight of masses, depending on the nature of said mass's energetics, whether electrical, magnetic, or inertial. We are very familiar with the relationship between electricity and magnetism, known as electromagnetism. But what about electrogravity and magnetogravity? If such a connection with gravity exists, then what is the nature of that connection? What is the key? For electromagnetism, we know that the key is motion. Moving electric charges or electrified surfaces, moving either in linear or rotational fashion, would generate an electric current, which in turn generates a magnetic field. And pulsating magnetic fields, or magnetic fields moving in linear or rotational fashion, can in turn create electrical fields. So what is the key between electromagnetism and gravity? Could it be frequency? We might recall the video, Geomagnetic Levitation, Project Magnet, and the Magnacraft, which described the Magnacraft as a conveyance which would use super strong pulsating magnetic fields to interact with the geomagnetic field and cause levitation. Of particular interest is the passage here, which curiously says that such pulsating magnetic fields don't attract metallic objects, and as a result behave more like the hypothetical antigravitational fields than magnetic fields. And in the document entitled Nikola Tesla's Electromagnetic Field Lift, there's a similar interesting passage which relates frequency to lift. Powerful currents of electricity flowing out over the surface of the craft would generate lift and propulsion. And we know that Tesla almost always used alternating currents in his experiments and inventions. And so how would a field alternating rapidly between negative and positive and between North Pole and South Pole be able to provide any net lift? If anything, it seems like the AC magnetic field would not produce any net lift against the Earth's DC electromagnetic and electrostatic fields, and would instead only generate a rapid oscillation and pushing and pulling against these fields. With the pushes canceling out the pulls, it would likely result in the craft either not moving at all, or perhaps it would bob up and down like an upside down subwoofer that is energized by an AC current, or perhaps even slide along the ground via acoustic lubrication and surface acoustic wave. But instead, it says that the higher the frequencies, the stronger it pushes against the Earth's electromagnetic and electrostatic fields. In other words, the levitational effect increases with the increase in frequency. Is it possible then that at certain frequencies, there's no longer just an electromagnetic force, but also an emerging anti-gravitational force? We may also remember from the video Vibratory Lift that the frequency of radiated gravity is set to be 10 to the 12 hertz, or 1 terahertz, on the electromagnetic spectrum. This seems to imply that an electromagnetic field vibrating and oscillating at this frequency could generate or radiate gravity. And by implication, as well as the philosophy of the summum, an acoustic field vibrating at this frequency should be able to achieve this as well. We already know that sound vibrations as phonons have negative mass and hence negative gravity, although the effects shown thus far have been very small. One thing for certain is that energy of sufficient magnitude will have the same effect of curving the fabric of space and time as mass does, and hence would be able to interact directly with a gravitational field. This would include electromagnetic energy as well as acoustic energy. And since magnetism and electricity in particular can be polarized, then could they exert both attractive and repulsive forces within their presence of gravity? And could the key to all of this in fact be frequency? If so, then we can see how sound as frequency could play an important role. Hence, perhaps the interrelations of the forces don't really prove that they are one and the same, but rather prove that they are different facets of the same underlying force or principle, as depicted in the triangular representation here. But going back to the magnet weighing experiment, in which a permanent magnet or electromagnet can gain or lose apparent weight depending on its polarity in the vertical direction, this principle should bring John Worrell Keely to mind, particularly his experiment in which he allegedly levitated a 6,000-pound steel sphere into the air, moved it a short distance, and then lowered it back down. He then reversed his wire, reactivated his vibratory device, with the result that the sphere became so heavy to the point that it buried itself into the floor. Interestingly, John Keely spoke of acoustic vibrations, which could influence a compass needle without the introduction of an actual magnet. He also claimed that the vibrations could intensify magnetism and by implication mitigate magnetism as well. He described what he called the Earth's polar currents, which according to him were magnetic currents or forces which envelop the earth, just as an orange is enveloped in its rind. We may also recall the previously highlighted passages from the book The Theayuba Prophecy, which describe gravity as the cold magnetic force which could be neutralized by certain acoustic vibrations. These concepts strongly imply that acoustic vibrations may allow one to potentially exert a certain degree of influence over not only magnetism and electricity, but even gravity as well. Hence, what we can see is that John Keely was not merely levitating objects with sound waves alone, as in modern continuous processing, but rather he was actually using acoustic vibrations as a means to access the universal forces of electricity, magnetism, gravity, and perhaps even the weak and strong nuclear force, as all of these forces are said to be vibratory in nature, just as sound is. It's just like the magical chants or words of power in the stories of old. It wasn't the acoustic force of the chants and words alone which raised or moved an object from the ground. Rather, the chants and words influenced the force of gravity, which in turn moved the object. In other words, sound vibrations might very well be the key to the unified field. Perhaps string theorists would agree. Needless to say, the research continues. Thanks for watching, and as always, stay tuned.